Project management students, greetings and welcome. It's exciting to get into this class with you all where we're going to be talking over the next few weeks about the ins and outs of project management. I'm your instructor, Kent Tonkin. I'm excited to be here with you today to talk about the introduction to project management. The purpose of this lecture is to really get us into some of the key concepts that go into managing projects. And these projects can be technology projects or standard projects of any description. The same principles apply. So I'm looking forward this semester to talking with you about how these principles can be applied in your daily work life and how you can be a better project manager by knowing the discipline. So today's lecture is all about getting into some of the core concepts. So what are our objectives for this discussion of our text? We want to talk about why IT project management and project management in general is so important. By the time we're done with our discussion, you should be able to determine what a project is, to provide examples that are projects, and to talk about some of the attributes that make them up. We're also going to talk about the project management discipline's history and to really talk about what kind of skills come into being a good project manager. Again, in the fast-moving area of business we're in the 21st century, these kinds of skills have never been more important. It's a very exciting and potentially growing area. So I'm looking forward to having this discussion with you. In addition, we're also going to talk about the difference between the three kinds of management between project, program, and portfolio, the three P's of project management, as it were, and how the scope and size of those areas and the orientation of those areas interact. We're also going to talk about, to be a good project manager, what kind of personality skills, what kind of interaction type skills, how you as an individual need to know how to interact. As much as we talk about technology, as much as we talk about frameworks, there are definitely soft skills that are involved in being a successful project manager as well. We're also going to talk about some of the other tools that come in to being a successful project manager and the value of certification. If you're somebody who really enjoys managing projects, there may be a future for you being certified to be a project manager, a PMP, a project management professional, so to speak. We'll talk about that as we get into today's lecture. So, why do we have such a big interest in project management? The bottom line is that the world is moving more quickly and we're spending a lot of money on projects. Technology itself is one of the biggest expenditures in any organization these days. If you look at the statistics, for example, right from our text, we're seeing a 2.4% increase from worldwide IT spending between 2016 and 2017. The bottom line is that almost all jobs are going to have a technology component to them. And when we start talking about implementing technology in organizations, we're talking about wide-reaching and long-range projects. This is an aside as well. Some back-of-the-envelope statistics, a lot of project managers predict within the next 10 years that about 40% of all existing jobs could be automated. Meaning that if you want to maintain your employment and maintain your usefulness to organizations, it's better to be in control of the organization. It's better to be in control of the technology. It's better to know how to organize organizations for the 21st century. It's a great way to build a career path for yourself. So, as we dive in today, keep those things in mind. If we look also, guys, I don't think anybody's career should be driven by money. The best advice I ever got from a previous boss was, when you are looking at your career options for your future, do not chase money. Chase success in what you love, and the money will follow. That being said, six-figure jobs are a regular reality in the world of project management. It's a high-demand skill. In addition to that, a lot of people who are good with communications, good with what we refer to as the soft skills, find their ways into more managerial parts of an organization, and they position themselves to be problem solvers. People with good communication skills who can interact with other people tend to be highly sought after no matter what the discipline is. And on top of that, people who choose to go for project management certification position themselves with companies like Booz Allen Hamilton, other government contractors who want to see people with certifications coming into their organizations. Why do we care about this so much? Well, the stats basically say for every $1 billion we spend on projects, about $97 million gets wasted. If you're in an organization where budgets are tight and you're trying to make use of dollars successfully and ethically, You want people who know how to run projects. Another reason why project management is such a hot field right now. So what are some of the advantages? Well, knowledge is power. Anytime that you can make good use of the key assets of your organization, you're going to be more powerful. To this day, even though technology is a big deal in our workforce, the number one expense in organizations is still, you guessed it, people. It still takes people to accomplish things. It takes people to make use of technology and to program computers and to make all of these amazing applications that we use on our smartphones work. Well, if you know how to run a project, you need to know how to deal with finances, you need to know how to deal with physical resources, and you need to know how to work with people. If you are using good project management, you're going to have better relationships with your customers, a more efficiently and well-run organization, and if you're making efficient use of goods and services and people, hopefully higher profit margins for your organization. The old adage is, if you don't know where you're going, how do you get there? The purpose of project management is also to be able to ensure that we are working toward the strategic goals of an organization. And this may be counterintuitive to some folks who take their first look at project management to see the effort that's required for project management and say, well, how does this increase morale? Well, organizational success increases morale. Having processes, having ways to get things done, and understanding how they work increases morale. So good project management can lead to well-run companies. Guys, my favorite example to use of a company that has made mistakes over the years would be BlackBerry. BlackBerry was arguably the first mainstream smartphone and had the lion's share of the market in the late 90s, early 2000s. Really, the first part of the 2000s was great to the company. 2007, the iPhone comes along and dominates the infrastructure. Here was a company that was at the top of their game, i.e. BlackBerry, with awesome market penetration, and they could not compete because of their rigidness. They did not have great ways to interact. They did not have good project management. And as of 2018, as of last year, BlackBerry's global market share was less than 1%. You've got to keep up with project management and running your organization well to be able to keep your morale up and high. So we have a few studies in here, for example, in our text that tell us what went wrong. And it's pretty interesting when we look at the idea of IT projects. About 2.5% of all corporations are meeting all of their goals. And it's the triple constraints of project management we'll talk about: scope, time, and cost. But that's not a good number, guys. And if we look at all of these statistics, the bottom line is that most organizations are having a hard time meeting these goals, in particular with information technology. I think we can attribute part of this issue to the fact that disciplines such as management and IT sometimes don't coordinate well, which is why we need great project managers. On top of that, organizations are just now starting to understand the role of technology. It's pretty interesting. I believe it was Ford Motor Company said they're no longer a car company, they're a technology company, and at this point everybody is a technology company, which means we've got to understand technology to be able to effectively manage it. So at this point we're going to get into some of the building blocks of what a project actually is. And I don't often read slides verbatim to students, but in this case it makes sense. What's a project? What's a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result? Let's diagnose this definition a little bit. We see that this is temporary. It's something we're using for a unique product or a service, and it's something that we're doing that's not daily operations. Here's the differentiator. If I run custodial services at St. Francis University and every day Schwab Hall gets cleaned, that's operational. Coming up with a new methodology for cleaning the building might be a project. If I'm Ford Motor Company, I build F-150s every single day, F-150 pickup trucks. That is operations. Coming up with a new design for the suspension, that's a project. When the project achieves its goal, it comes to an end. Operations continue unless there's a reason for them to stop. So a project is not business as usual. It's something that's changing the way we do business or solving a particular need. That's an important differentiator. So here might be some examples of IT projects. Again, right out of our text. these are temporary types of endeavors. They may change our operations. For example, the company that's developing a driverless car certainly would want to sell that car. So the idea of the project would be developing it. Once it goes into manufacturing and sales, then it's an operation. Or if you're in a government and you're tracking who's getting their immunizations every year, you might be building the system to make sure that you can keep track of all that information, but the immunization process itself is still operational. So again, it means it's a unique one-off kind of an approach. So if you want to know what the big projects were for the most recent year, the big projects were things involving artificial intelligence. When we say intelligent things, we're also talking about the Internet of Things, or IoT, that we're developing things like smart televisions and smart devices and smart cars. Cloud to the edge simply means, for example, if you want to know why we're able to carry such powerful computers in the palm of our hands in the form of our smartphones, it's because more of the processing power is being put someplace else. It's being distributed. And again, immersive experience, virtual reality. If it wasn't bad enough that we're staring into our phones all the time, pretty soon we'll all be wearing immersive reality headsets that will allow us to escape reality on a regular basis. These are all examples of IT projects, recent projects, that is. So it's pretty interesting when we think about how people are downloading apps. Think about this for a second. In 2018, we celebrated 10 years of the iPhone. So 10 years ago, people were not downloading mobile apps. 10 years ago, we had people using Blackberries and flip phones and a variety of mobile devices, but we did not have the online ecosystem for developing and distributing apps like we do today. This has changed the world. This process has changed the world in terms of what we expect in terms of rapid software development, constant updates, and the idea that companies are doing more and more project work all the time. Think about this if you're a video game developer. If you made something like Madden football, you might do a release every year for home computers and for PlayStation and for Xbox. These are now constant sources of development because people want new games on their mobile phones all the time. What this means is we have more and more need for project development as a constant source of product. So what are some attributes of a project? We know it's temporary, but it's to serve a unique goal. It means that it hopefully adds value. It almost always implies something that we either haven't done before or something that we're changing. When we're doing a project, we almost always need to pull in resources from other parts of our organization. We also have what we refer to as a customer or a sponsor. For example, within an organization, the project sponsor may be a person with the power to greenlight a project who is backing up the project. Or even if that person does not have the authority or resources on a formal level, they may have the organizational clout to be able to say this is a project worth taking on. That's a person we refer to as a sponsor. So if you're the project manager, if you're the person put in charge of managing all this chaos, you've got to work with all of these individuals and somehow get everybody on the same page so they're all working towards the same goals. Being a project manager, in my humble opinion, is equal parts training and just personality skills. Somebody with the right temperament to be able to work with multiple individuals and to pull them toward a common goal. We talk about the triple constraints of project management. Well, here they are. We've got the scope, cost, and time constraints. I also refer to them as the goals. What are they? A scope refers to how big something is. So when we're doing a project, it can be large or small in scope. A project could be something as simple as, for this weekend, my project is to put together a bird feeder for my deck for my house. It's a very small scope. Or it could be as large as saying we're going to redo our entire educational catalog at St. Francis, which would be large in scope. Well, your cost also is often associated with scope. What's it going to cost to do this project? My $12 birdhouse versus my multi-million-dollar redo of all the education programs at St. Francis. What about our time? Well, my goal for building the birdhouse this weekend might be no more than a day and a half, where large projects can go over months, years, even decades. So these three play with each other. They all interact, and the target is a result of all three. We're going to be repeatedly talking about these triple constraints or triple goals as we go through. The previous versions of our text referred to them as constraints, so I use that term interchangeably here. Goal is a much more positive spin on that term. So what is project management? We know what a project is. Well, a project manager is somebody who is able to use their skills and develop skills to be able to manage those three constraints: time, scope, and cost, and to also be able to make sure that we are fitting the needs of the organization. In other words, are we satisfying the needs for which the project was created in the first place? Are we able to, as a project manager, tie together all the right folks who have to accomplish this as an organization? So project managers are people who are good. The old analogy is they're good at keeping plates spinning on the top of poles. I don't know if you've ever seen performers who can do that, or good at juggling, good at keeping things up in the air while they're dealing with other things. We're going to talk about some of the skills that are required of project managers. So if we look at this, this diagram, it's a really good description of the project management framework. All these knowledge areas are things that project managers have to be good at, have to know how to do. We're going to talk about all of these in the course of the semester, whether you're managing scope, schedule, cost, quality, or any of these other areas. What a project manager does is right in the middle, and that's project integration management. If you're in a corporate structure, chances are you're not going to be doing all of these things yourself, which means you've got to manage the people who are doing those things. All of those projects go into what we can refer to as project portfolios. We're going to be talking about programs and portfolios as well as we go along. But if you have successful projects that result in successful programs and project portfolios, you also have success for the organization. The bottom line is that project managers play in this sandbox right in the middle. That's what people who are good at project management do. Well, what are stakeholders? Stakeholders are anybody who could have an effect or be affected by the project. And so anybody who touches this project, whether they are in a particular department, whether they work for you, or whether they are a customer, can be affected. So look at these potential stakeholders. The person who's willing to put their name and their reputation on the line to get this project greenlit, the sponsor, obviously has a stakeholder in this regard. People who are giving you money to do this project are stakeholders. If you want to know why people want to see business plans, they want to see if your project's going to succeed. The people who are managing the project and working on the project. Even people who work in an administrative capacity who are doing your accounting or keeping your meeting minutes are also important for this. The people who are supplying your supplies for the project. And this is a big one too, guys. Your opponents. There are people who thought your project was a bad idea. They're stakeholders because they cannot wait to see you fail if they think you were wrong in the first place. So yeah, they're a stakeholder too. So in terms of the knowledge areas, we put them all on a previous slide, but they're all areas that project managers have to be able to be good at to be able to manage. The three constraints obviously are time, scope, and cost. But to that end, you've got to be able to manage things like communications, risk in the project, engaging with stakeholders, and overall integrating the project. So we're not going to dwell a lot on these individual areas here because we're going to be covering them individually in each chapter in the 13 chapters of this book. And you're going to be, I won't say an expert, but you're going to be conversant in these areas by the time we're done with this chapter. So what are some of the tools that we use? We're going to be actually making use of some of these tools throughout the semester. There are lots of tools that range from very simple to very highly technical. Some of the ones that we're going to be dealing with a good bit are things like a project charter. Your charter is kind of like your Bible. What is the purpose of this project? Why are we doing it? Who's signing on? Your scope statement says how big your project's going to be. And your work breakdown structure, your WBS, shows how the processes work. We get into a lot of different ways to graphically represent how our project works. And I'm hoping you've heard of a Gantt chart. If you have not, fear not. A Gantt chart is a graphic way to represent every task in a project and what we refer to as your critical path. We're going to be talking a lot about critical path. What a critical path means is what is the longest time it could possibly take to get through this project. If you are estimating your schedule for the project, you want to go with the worst possible outcome, and that is your critical path. You also want to be able to determine what this project is going to cost and what kind of value it's adding to your organization. Again, we're going to be talking about and doing exercises all semester that will allow you to really experiment with some of these concepts. So in terms of some of the management tools and ways that we are able to determine whether or not we have a successful project, our PMBOK guide, which if you're ever taking your PMP, we have a number of tools that they list in terms of areas where they think we need effective tools for project management. Data gathering and analysis. In other words, if you're creating software, you're going to want to know if your code has errors. Data representation. How are you able to communicate and show people whether or not your project is working? If you're doing something highly technical, that can be very detailed charts and graphs. Data representation for a financial firm might simply be charts in black and red to show if you're making money or not. Decision making. The more information you have, generally speaking, the better informed you are to make a decision, so long as your key decision holders can understand it. And that's where we cross over into communication. And communication is one of my passions in terms of studying that field, because we're in a unique era where we've got 5 generations in the workforce and they all communicate differently. So knowing how best to reach out to someone is important too. That also crosses over with interpersonal and team skills, and people have different ways in which they're able to either build consensus or not. If you're a good project manager, you'll know how to build consensus. And we refer to ungrouped. It means there are other things that come up and skills we have to learn on the way, because we, as project managers, are sometimes called to improvise. Anybody who's met me in person, I should say, knows I'm a musician, and one of my favorite expressions is, if you do it once, it's a mistake. If you do it twice, it's jazz. All that means is there are times when you will, as a project manager, encounter things that you have never seen before, just like a musician sometimes makes a mistake. The musician at that point can either look frightened to death and acknowledge that they played the wrong chord, or they can come up with a new way to make that chord musical and fit in the song. And that's improvisation. That's some of the skill sets that are ungrouped in project management. So our text does a great job of also pointing out the reasons why sometimes projects go right. In terms of small, medium, and large projects, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this other than to say there are reasons why the ways that we engineer software and IT types of approaches are changing and going to things like agile and waterfall types of arrangements. We'll be talking about those different types of arrangements, which really are more of a systems analysis and design concept, but they do play a role in project management as well. The bottom line is well-managed projects do tend to be more successful than those that are kind of ad hoc. So how do you determine if your project has been successful? Well, the most obvious one is, did you hit your goals? Did the project stay within the size that you wanted it to be? Was it delivered on time? Was it on or under budget? Those are pretty easy. And by the way, if the project is bigger than we wanted it to be, we refer to that as scope creep. That means we kept letting the project get bigger. It's kind of like when you go to a car dealership and all of a sudden you went in for a basic pickup truck with roll-down windows and two-wheel drive, and you're driving off with a $75,000 Silverado 2500 with a lift kit. You went beyond the scope that you had originally intended. We call that scope creep. Was the sponsor and the customer happy? Even if you went a little over budget, was your sponsor still okay with it? That's a project success criteria as well. Did you satisfy the reason you started the project in the first place? As we'll see that I will share with you, there have been times in government, for example, that projects have failed because they weren't clearly defined in the first place? Did we even know what constituted success? Did you solve the problem you set out to solve? So in terms of the Standish group has a manifesto they refer to as the Chaos Manifesto, and they assign points to what they believe contribute to the success of projects. Look what's right on top. We got executive sponsorship. So do you have somebody who's bought in? Do you have somebody who's mature emotionally running the project? Somebody can handle pressure, for example. This is one of the areas where I think companies repeatedly fail. Was the user involved? If you're producing a product, why not have the person who's ultimately going to be using it and invested in the process? I often tell my undergraduate students in Biz 101, for example, that companies should be happy when customers complain. Sometimes students look at me like I've got two heads, but the point is your customers will tell you what to fix. Your end users will tell you what to do to the product to make it right because they're the ones who have to live with it. And again, it's interesting. Look at the project management expertise only rates about a 5. What that means is everybody's got to start somewhere. You can learn these processes. Nobody is an expert to start with. So what are the reasons why these projects succeed? Funding's a big part of it. Staff expertise. Do you have good people working for you? One of my favorite things to share, guys, when I first started working in technology many moons ago, I graduated with an undergraduate degree in communications, which I'm very proud of. I'm glad I did it. But I started off managing an IT department. I had no basis in IT at all. I had to learn from very qualified people who were willing to work with me and educate me. And I refer to those folks as having staff expertise. The other part is getting engagement throughout your organization. The expression, the cliche is that people need to have skin in the game. When people have buy-in, when they are believing that their involvement matters, when you engage the stakeholders, those folks have a reason to go to the wall for you when things are not going well. And in terms of other reasons that companies succeed, well, number one, they've got processes. They're not just ad hocing every single project. They've got a way they do things. Sometimes the upfront requirements in terms of the documents you have to create and the paperwork you have to file seems onerous. But there are reasons behind it. We're making sure, for example, boxes get checked and that we are doing what we refer to as due diligence to ensure that our projects are good. So the bottom line is you got to jump through a few hoops to go through a process, but the process has been shown to guarantee some level of success. You've got to grow leaders, and there's a number of reasons why you don't want to forget about this step. The old expression is, well, what would you do if this guy or this girl got hit by a bus? Who'd run the show tomorrow? Well, the bottom line is you need to have some continuity in leadership. You need to have succession planning, and the more that you're growing people who are empowered to take leadership roles within an organization, the more potential projects can be managed. In terms of a streamlined project delivery process, that means you need to be documented, but not to the point where your processes for documenting your project are getting in the way of doing the actual work. When I say this, I'm not criticizing my colleagues in government, but government often gets criticized as being bureaucratic, and as somebody who used to have to try to purchase technology through government regulations, it did slow you down. So you want to make sure your project process is not slowing down the project itself. There have to be ways to measure whether or not the project is doing well. And are we getting a good return on investment and ROI? Are our customers happy? How do you measure and assess that stuff? So we're going to talk about the differentiations between project and portfolio management. Really, in terms of project to program to portfolio, they start at more limited scopes and move up to larger kinds of scope. And when we're saying scope, we're meaning larger and more general collections of projects. Projects are specific work, programs are associated projects, and portfolios essentially are gatherings of programs. This will all make sense when we put it together. We'll use some examples to show how this fits together. The bottom line is companies are spending a lot of our GDP on projects, and we use programs and portfolios to turn these into commercializable efforts. Let's get into some discussion. So according to our good friends at PMBOK, We've got a program existing as a group of related projects managed in a coordinated manner to obtain benefits and control not available from managing them individually. Let's put that in context. If we've got a program, it would indicate, for example, we had two projects. We have one in a building that's replacing the entire physical cabled network. We have another project in another building that is replacing the Wi-Fi network, the wireless network. Those together could be called a series of projects that fit together under a program. That program, the networking part of things, could fit under an entire portfolio of projects which would fall under IT services. So IT services has the portfolio, the programs fall under the portfolio, and the projects fall under the program. So again, the person who's a program manager is providing leadership. So somebody who's an expert in networking, for example, could handle physical and wireless networks because it's similar types of shared expertise. So another part of this, when we get into organizations, we basically try to maximize efficiency and centralize expertise by putting these portfolios and projects together. So again, projects become programs, which become portfolios. And somebody who's managing a portfolio, picture this as the person who's standing higher up. The person, for example, who manages the division at General Motors, manages people who make pickup trucks and SUVs as part of that division of the company. So we've got the person who manages the portfolio, and underneath the portfolio we've got programs. So the SUV program, the pickup truck program, and underneath each of those we've got projects, developing new suspensions or new steering columns. So again, it's an idea of how we organize and group. So we go from tactical to strategic. Tactical means things that need done right now. Strategic means where we are heading in the long run. So a tactical goal is something that needs done in terms of a project, where strategic is more overarching. So we start off at project and we go from project management to project and program portfolio management. So as you move up the continuum, the portfolios at the top, projects are at the bottom, and programs would be right in the middle. So example, with General Motors, a project would be we're creating a new steering column for our pickups. A program, we've got a program that does light truck development for our General Motors Corporation. And the portfolio would be, we've got a whole portfolio of pickups and SUVs. That's how companies are divided. That's how project work essentially gets associated. So best practices means that we've got ways that we do things in organizations. We know what works well for us. For example, some organizations learn the hard way that people don't often write things down. It could be a best practice to say we're going to keep a central knowledge repository of all the work we're doing in a given series of projects or portfolios. Whatever has been shown to work well in your organization is something to be replicated or revisited from time to time. That's what we refer to as a best practice. So in terms of organizational project management, that means that we get all of these types of management we just talked about from portfolio, program, and project, and we integrate them with people and services and structures within organizations to be able to make sure we are satisfying the strategy of our overall organization. Here we have an example of a series of portfolios that might exist at an organization. Could exist at a factory or at a university. Could exist in a number of organizations. We've got one portfolio that's HR, we've got marketing, we've got IT, we've got materials. If we're thinking about IT project management or IT portfolios, for example, we've got several areas in which we've got to manage those projects. We've got the core areas. You've got to keep the email and the printers running. Growth and venture means we're going to grow the business. We're going to get more people buying our product. Venture means we're creating new products. That takes us from the bottom, the core processes. That's non-negotiable. We've got to have budget to be able to power that stuff. When we get into the areas where we're growing or transforming the business, that's what we refer to as discretionary costs. So what's a project manager do? The project manager is the person who's going to be herding these cats, the person who's going to be working with everybody who's working on the project, and you better be keeping your project sponsor engaged. These are people who also have to, if they're not experts in all these areas, are at least conversant with them and are able to talk to other people who are conversant in the areas they need to use to effectively run a project. So it's tough to come up with a job description, per se, for a project manager. But it's somebody who's able to multitask. It's somebody who's able to learn information very quickly. Whether or not you're in IT or non-IT, most businesses at this point are touching technology at some point. Project managers come from all walks of life, and it's a skill that we need in almost every field at this point. So what makes for a good project manager? Well, our text lists this as advice for young professionals. I list this as advice for professionals in general because people of any age can become a project manager. Good things to think about if you're considering getting into this field. What kind of experiences have you had with management? What made you happy? What didn't you like? What didn't work well? What did work well? Can you think of lessons learned and ways you could have done better? Are you a good role model? Are you somebody who takes charge? Are you somebody who's comfortable with responsibility? These are attributes that make people good project managers. Some of the other skills. Obviously, we keep on referring to the Project Management Institute's the body of knowledge, the BOK. The entire text we're reading is based on PMP type principles. What about your area? Are you a subject matter expert in the project you're managing? That doesn't mean that somebody who doesn't know a particular discipline can't come in and become conversant. But somebody, for example, who's managing a project at a car company should probably have some basis in the automotive industry. What about your management skills? Are you good at managing people? And are you good at building relationships? Because even in this world of high technology, people make this stuff work or not. You better be able to relate to people. So these are, right from our text, the idea of being able to be a successful manager. This is my favorite part of this. In addition to living with integrity and knowing how to communicate with people, the bottom line is you got to be able to live with uncertainty and ambiguity, because sometimes things can seem muddy. You've got to look for patterns. You've got to sometimes get involved in the chaos before the pattern or the solution begins to emerge. So if you don't deal well with uncertainty or ambiguity, project management may not be your field. So in terms of PMI, again, they believe that when it comes down to being a good project manager, you've got to have technical skills, you've got to be able to think strategically, but you've got to be a leader. And there's lots of different kinds of leadership styles. If we're talking laissez-faire, that means you basically are good with letting people do whatever so long as the job gets done. Some people are transactional, meaning they don't really care if they get to know the people they work with so long as they do what they're told. Servant leaders are the people who are going to work side by side with you and jump in when the going gets tough. The tough part about servant leaders is sometimes they have a hard time positioning themselves as bosses. Transformational leaders are people who are willing to come in and really investigate the way work is done and say we're going to reinvent it. Charismatic leaders are people who are able through their personality to be able to get people inspired. Interactional people are people who listen. They're different terminologies depending on the types of management texts you read. Some people would refer also to a democratic leader, somebody who effectively delegates. The bottom line is I don't think anybody really fits completely into one category or another. There's big careers. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about this because we hit on it earlier. But there are lots of openings in companies for project managers. And if you can take the heat, if you can deal with the stress, if you feel you have this in you, they are well-paying and very exciting careers. So lots of possibilities. They're one of the quickest growing job fields. Again, stats from 2017 in terms of areas that are associated with project management that are our top skills for 2017 and beyond. So the profession, however, is well established. Even though we may have referred to project management by different names in the past, it's a discipline that's been growing and evolving for some time. We're going to talk about actually the roots of project management. In fact, this is one of those questions that often turns up on an exam, where the first formal project management came from. There are some folks who say that when we talk about project management, we can trace it back to the lineage of some of the great monuments of ancient societies. We're talking about Egyptian pyramids or the Great Wall of China. The general consensus is that the first modern project management was the Manhattan Project. If you're not familiar with the Manhattan Project, it was the project undertaken by the U.S. government to create an atomic bomb in World War II. Very complex, dealing with multiple scientists, military individuals, and technicians at a layer that we had not seen up until that point in terms of the complexity of the project. So, if we look at it, going back to 1946, $2 billion project, amazing amount of money that was spent on this, and in terms of the complexity, the likes of which we had not seen up to that point. I put this up to say in terms of history of project management, we started off doing everything on pen and paper, and this is a screenshot of a Microsoft project file to show you how many of these processes are automated. Now you can see the linkages between these projects, the steps in the project, I should say. As we get through the semester, you're going to see how to create these kinds of files yourself, how to actually delineate projects using some of the technology tools that are available, and to be able to graphically display them. To build on an earlier point, sometimes it's not always what you say, but how you say it or how you display it. In this case, can we put information into a form that makes it easy for people to understand? In the 90s, as we got further into the dot-com era and technology started taking over more and more manual processes, all of a sudden everybody wanted to start a project management office. And it's the idea that we had a place within a company that would control the methodologies of how we'd manage projects, serve as a central repository for key information. After all, if we're looking at new projects, there's a chance that somebody in our organization did similar work at a previous time. So why not build upon that expertise? As the old cliche goes, why reinvent the wheel? So the project management office as a modern concept really came out of the 1990s. So if we look at the percentage of organizations who say that they have PMOs, and in terms of what the criteria is, they can go from a very informal to a very formal project management office. Large companies, if you're looking at the Googles and the Amazons and the Fords of the world, it's unimaginable they would not be in some centralized way managing projects with some sort of a project management office. Well, when we get into working globally, because that is a big part of the modern economy, we have to think about how we manage projects. Well, there's lots of reasons behind this. In terms of having a universal education for project management, PMI, for example, Project Institute is an international organization, and it means that we want to make sure that we're maintaining consistent standards and methods of training across countries. And if you're working in Germany, or if you're working in the United States, or if you're working in Japan, the same kinds of methodologies of managing projects, although they may be effective, there may be cultural nuances as well. The bottom line is that across industrialized cultures, we realize that using formal project management methodologies produces efficiencies and benefits. So PMI, I've referenced them several times. The Project Management Institute started in 1969. It really is a certification group so that you can be certified that you are somebody who is versed in the principles of project management. People who choose to become project management professionals, like other organizations or like other professions rather, have to get recertified from time to time by getting continuing education and showing that they're keeping up with trends. If you're interested in project management, it's a certification worth pursuing. So for students too, students can get a reduced price of membership and the required training. I don't spend a lot of time talking about that in this class, but if you're interested in a PMP certification, there are prerequisites including work experience. I encourage you to go to the Project Management Institute online to check that out. So the PMI Project Management Institute provides several types of project management certification. The most common and well known is a project management professional. This certification is an essential in some companies to get any kind of career advancement, and is highly sought after by others. On average, people with PMPs are often seen in six-figure or above salaries. Companies like Booz Allen Hamilton, Lockheed Martin, big defense contractors, may even have contracts that require people with PMP certification. And as we move into an era where individuals want to differentiate themselves in the workplace, PMP is becoming a more and more popular certification. So in terms of the folks who are getting certified, the chart says it all. More and more people are interested. In the late 90s, you would have been unusual if you had entered the workforce with such a certification. And you may have even encountered folks who didn't even know what that certification was. Not so today. It is a very popular certification, one worth pursuing if this is a work that is appealing to you. So in terms of ethics, we talk a lot about the technical parts of project management, but there also are a number of ethical dilemmas that are really based in our modern age. We have better access to information than any generation prior to us, meaning that we can use information for right or wrong purposes. We can choose how to distribute information. We can choose how we interact with other folks. And given some of the scandals of the last 20 years, thinking of things like the Enron scandal and Bernie Madoff, for example, there's been an increased emphasis on ethics, which is why that is a part of the exam process for the PMP at this point. Again, I made reference to the fact that we are using some powerful tools, some mega tools, things like Microsoft Project. There are the factory standard or the industry standard for these kinds of tools is Microsoft Project, which we will be exploring together this semester, or an alternative. There are a number of free or open source pieces of software such as Open Project or Project Libre, and even higher end tools that are enterprise software. Some of the names you might hear beside Project are Basecamp or Project Libre, for example. We're going to be exploring those together depending on which product you have access to. You're still going to see how they can offer benefits in terms of automating some of these processes. So to summarize our chapter, projects are temporary. We undertake them for a specific purpose with a specific scope and time. If you're getting into project management is the idea of coordinating projects and multiple people, priorities, to be able to satisfy the triple constraints of time, scope, and cost. So folks who are good project managers are skilled at project integration management. If we get from programs to portfolios versus projects grouped together become programs, which grouped together become portfolios, and managing them is another skill entirely. People who are good project managers are able to tie organizations together, and the profession as itself is young and continuing to mature. Thank you today for your time and attention. I look forward to reading your work.